let's talk about what we have coming up tonight. We have the wonderful filmmaker Barry Avrich. I've known Barry Avrich for a few years. I'm going to come to that in a moment, but he is, without question, one of the most, if not the most, distinguished filmmaker with certainly a specialty in doing documentary films. And Barry, it's just a thrill for us to have you on Evenings with Steve tonight during this We Miss the Movies month. So welcome to the program.
There we go. Sorry, Steve. Great to be there. I'm sorry I'm not wearing a tie, but I'm happy to be with you.
Well, I just give it a little bit of gravitas. So it's only me who wears the tie, the suit. And the truth is, because we do Zoom court right now as criminal lawyers, we don't even get to wear suits very often anymore. So I'm actually relish the opportunity. So Barry, you know, obviously COVID has impacted on all of us in many ways. How has it impacted on you as a filmmaker?
Well, you know, I learned early on that you really can't isolate your imagination. If you're a filmmaker, you have to sort of keep going. What I miss are the audiences. I miss the film festivals. Ironically, and in some cases serendipitously, Steve, COVID hit as I was making a film about Howie Mandel, you know, the world's most famous germaphobe. So, you know, this was a world he already knew. It wasn't a world I knew. So we just kept filming through it and experimented with different filming techniques. And he often would let us, you know, go to him with a crew and often in a hazmat suit and me directing via Zoom. I haven't liked that part of it. The funniest thing has been the Howie Mandel film, which was in Canada on Crave and soon to be in the US on a major streamer. We have played more Jewish film festivals because everybody needs content. I have never been virtually to so many Jewish film festivals in my life. And of course, the Jewish people at a film festival, there's more announcements, even though nobody's there. The bathroom to the left. If you want to get a knish, go to the right. Go to here, wait for your questions after. It's about 4 hours till the film starts, but I'm happy to be somewhere.
Well, I'm very happy that, you know, that by contrast, we didn't have very much of an introduction. We got right to you, our featured speaker, Barry.
You did.
So you have a wonderful project coming up in the fall, and I just want to talk about that. I hope it comes out in the fall, but it's about the great Canadian jazz musician, the pianist, Oscar Peterson. It's called Black and White. He's a pianist who's played with some of the finest singers and musicians in history, including Ella Fitzgerald, Count Basie, Louis Armstrong, and Nat King Cole. And I don't think I'm a jazz aficionado, and I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that Oscar Peterson stands on the same pedestal of greatness with the greats of jazz like Thelonious Monk, Miles Davis, John Coltrane. He's there. He's in that league, and he's Canadian. And he also, when you see him being interviewed, watch him, you can just see this wonderful human being. It just comes through that he was just a lovely person. So how did you come to do Peterson? What was the draw? Why did you pick him as the person you were going to do a film about?
You know, I had not really done the definitive music documentary yet. I mean, other than I had done David Foster Off the Record for Crave in Canada, Netflix in the United States, but I hadn't really focused on a solo artist yet. And my production partner, Mark Selby, who's a great pianist in his own right, and I were sitting around talking about, you know, who should we look at doing for our next film? And Oscar Peterson to me was a natural because there really hadn't been much done. There was one film done many years ago, but nothing definitive. And we pitched it and got very excited about it. And the interesting, talk about 6 degrees of separation, Steve, I mentioned to my 92-year-old mother in Montreal, said, what are you working on? I said, I'm going to do a film about Oscar Peterson. She goes, oh yeah, well, we knew him. And I went, how's that? What do you mean you knew him? So, and as it turned out, my grandfather, who was sort of the kosher butcher in Montreal, had a brother, Uncle Max, who worked on the trains as a porter with Oscar's father. And my grandfather would give the family kosher meat.
Oh, wow.
So so Oscar Peterson was eating kosher meat, which I love. So another reason to make the film. But we're shooting the film as a docu-concert, and we're bringing together some of the great Canadian jazz musicians to play the music of Oscar. Jackie Richardson, Larnell Lewis, Dave Young, some of the great musicians who have played over the years. Robbie Botosh was one of his mentees. So I'm excited about it. And there's so much, we're finding incredible lost footage as well. So it's going to be a beauty.
You know, the history of jazz in America, which is so much attached to the Black community. There's so many great Black musicians, has a sordid history too of racism. And I'm just wondering if there is an aspect of the film that is going to confront Oscar Peterson's journey and his problems with racism.
Massive part of the film, huge chapter. Everybody saw the movie Green Book, and so much of what was portrayed in that film, based on true stories, of course, is what Oscar experienced. But not only traveling through the U.S. And in Europe in that time period, but also growing up in Montreal, and being in mixed marriages, and also playing with musicians that were mixed. Quite often, he would get confronted with horrendous racism where people wouldn't shake his hand, and of course, the staying in hotels that were segregated, and playing in clubs, and people were very uncomfortable with the fact that white musicians were playing with Black musicians. They were not given the same credit as the swing musicians an era before, the Benny Goodmans and the Tom Dorseys. So that became Tommy Dorsey. So that became a real thing that Oscar had to confront. But along with Norman Granz, his promoter, they both really took that head on. Norman, his promoter, would not stay in white hotels. He'd stay with the band, stay with Oscar. And he really convinced Oscar to write Hymn to Freedom, which is one of the greatest pieces of music, which we'll have in our film, with the great Jackie Richardson singing that great ballad that really talks about this almost Martin Luther King aspirational moment of when Black people should have and experience the freedom they so deserve.
All right, so the film's black and white, coming out in the fall, and I can't wait to see it, Barry. I'm really looking forward to it. So before we get to our first film, I just have to introduce a personal element, and that is that I've actually appeared in one of Barry Avrich's films. And I'm sure among the many people you've interviewed, part of, I am, right at the bottom, but close to the floor. But for me, it was an incredible moment. I'm in this movie, and it was the Gar Trubinsky film, which we're not going to highlight tonight. And of course, I was giving some legal analysis, legal commentary, and I got to do the red carpet. I think it premiered at TIFF, Toronto Film Festival. Yeah, and I got to do that, and it was just really exciting. So there it is. That's my personal moment. Now we'll move on to your great films and the great people you interviewed. So, I chose a very heavy film for the first film, but I must tell you that I watched clips of this film. First of all, I watched the whole film, of course, but it's the rare clip of a movie that I can watch, Barry, 5, 6, 7 times that gets me emotional, gets me to cry each time I watch it. And we're going to watch a clip of that involving the next film. And that's, of course, the story of Ben Ferencz, prosecuting evil. And why don't you just give us a quick introduction of who Ben Ferencz is, because he is still living. Who is Ben Ferencz?
Ben Ferencz just celebrated his 101st birthday a few weeks ago. I'm happy to talk to him for that. He is the last living Nuremberg prosecutor who prosecuted 12 Nazis. He is one of the great human rights lawyers, activists, who also a co-creator of the International Criminal Court. He is one of the most spectacular human beings one has ever met, filled with hope, encouragement. I adore him.
Just to set the stage of the stature of Ben Ferencz, he received the same medal of Nelson Mandela. And he mentions it in the film as something that was a great achievement for him because he had so much admiration for Mandela. But when you can use the same sentence, you can mean the same sentence as Nelson Mandela, that speaks to your greatness. So we're going to start, Barry, with just
politics, Steve. He would have the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, there's no question. He's that part of the world.
Yeah. For me, as a human rights, dedicated to social justice, Mandela's the guy. I mean, if you can reach that to me is the highest level, and he deserves it, Ben Ferencz. So we're going to watch the trailer, Barry. We're going to talk a bit more, and then we're going to watch the clip from the film that I was mentioning that's so emotionally draining. So if we can, Jan, with the assistance of our
I carry with me the burden of having seen man's inhumanity to man in ways which are incredible to a rational mind, and that will always remain with me. I am Ben Ferencz. 70 years ago, I was a prosecutor at the Nuremberg trials in what was certainly the biggest murder trial in history.
Ben Ferencz is an icon, really, in international criminal justice. We are talking about a man whose career spans 7 decades.
International criminal law. This trial, well, what was most significant about it was it gave us an insight into the mentality of mass murderers. They had murdered over 1 million people, including hundreds of thousands of children in cold blood.
Ben is the personification of the international do-gooder, somebody who has no goal in life other than to bring justice to an unjust world.
My dad used to ask us, and I kid you not, around the dinner table every night, what have you done for mankind today?
War can make murderers out of otherwise decent people. It may come as a shock to some of the viewers who perceive these mass murderers as horrible beasts. Not so.
At such a young age, in such a critical moment in modern history, to be in the thick of things, to do the right thing with conviction and courage, and to have witnessed what he had witnessed and turn that into a positive contribution for the better of humanity, it's really something to admire and try to emulate.
The impact of war itself on people affected me so that I wanted to stop war making, and have in fact devoted most of my life in that effort to trying to create a more humane world.
His humanity and his compassion and his fearless commitment to justice all of these years make him one of the most important figures of our time.
And Barry will just for the record note that the last speaker in that large room was Justice Rosalie Abella, one of the great judges in the history of the Supreme Court of Canada, referring to Ben Ferencz as one of the great figures of all time. And it's just to set some context here. So many of us know the Nuremberg trial by the Spencer Tracy movie. The film where the leaders of the Nazi movement were prosecuted and before an international court. But what's less known is that there were a series of trials in Nuremberg in the same court, not in an international court in front of American judges. And essentially what was targeted were groups of people who perpetrated evil, doctors who conducted experiments, lawyers who flouted the law and helped promulgate the Nazi laws that persecuted Jews and many others, the judges who enforced those inhumane laws, the industrialists, the pharmacies that had the gas that was used in the gas chamber. So there were a series of trials And the prosecutor assigned to those trials was a man named Telford Taylor, a very distinguished man. And he brings Ferenc in, who comes out of Harvard, and Ferenc is there as an assistant. And so that sets the context for the clip that we're going to see shortly. But it's interesting why the trials took place in Nuremberg, Barry, and you referred to this in the film. The two reasons: the first is that it was one of the few, if not the only, Palace of Justices that remained intact after the bombardment by the Allies. But I think more importantly, Nuremberg had symbolic value, right, Barry? This is where the propaganda rallies, when you see those Nazi films, this was Nuremberg, that was the city. And so there was some justice in having these perpetrators of evil on trial in the city of Nuremberg. What was Ben Ferenc like when you would get him off camera and you'd have just a few moments? Was he full of life? Was he a funny man? What kind of man was he?
Yeah, well, I mean, let me go back to your earlier comment. Going to Nuremberg, I mean, aside from filming Ben, which was, I think, one of the greatest highlights of my life, and you made reference to people I've filmed in tons of documentaries. That is the highlight. If I never film anyone again, that's enough, because it was the most fulfilling moment of my life. To spend time with him is as close as you're going to get to Mandela or Gandhi or Mother Teresa. That's it. Going to Nuremberg was one of the most eerie moments ever. I've been to the camps. That's certainly, soul shaking and earth shattering. Walking into that courtroom in Nuremberg, dealing with the staff, and it's very Germanic, and there's not a lot of sympathy for a film crew showing up where their town is known as a not exactly a big tourist destination on that end of it. And so you're coming into this courtroom, which is very much like it was in 1944, 45 on that end of it when these trials took place. The elevator where the Nazis were taken up and down to their defendants' box is still there. I went to the prison where the Nazi defendants were held, dealt with a warden who was as scary as ever. It was just frightening to be in that courthouse. Frightening, not only as a Jew, as any sort of human being. To the other part of your question of what's Ben like, Ben is like everybody's grandfather. I adore him. He's a very simple but brilliant man. The first time we showed this film, Steve, was in The Hague, in front of 800 law students. And we showed the film, and as we were watching the film, Ben took out a paper bag and ate a sandwich. I was the pretentious director who had asked for sushi. He's eating from a paper bag, and continued to eat a sandwich during the questions after. When we were doing Academy screenings for the film in Los Angeles, he flew to LA. He did, economy is fine. And I don't want to stay in any fancy hotel. That's just not who he is. And you have a lot of fun with him when you're with him. I mean, you can debate. It's a mind that's much bigger than any mind I could ever think of having. But he's also just he's a Zeta. He's just such a charming, lovely man. I adore him.
I'm just curious to know if he was reticent about talking about a period of his life that clearly was traumatic. It's impossible because he didn't just prosecute. He had to investigate. He had to go to these camps. He had to immerse himself in the horror, because as any great lawyer has to do, that's the only way to defend or prosecute a case. And I'm just wondering if it was something that he was prepared to talk about readily or not.
Well, look, you're right. He not only did he liberate the camps, he investigated the camps and war crimes. He did, a lot of stuff that just didn't make it in the film. Incredible work in restitution. Preserving the cemetery, some of that's in the film. He's open to talking about it because he wants to ensure that, we never forget. At the same time, Holocaust education is not mandatory in schools, which is shocking and should be. And he will keep talking as long as he can breathe. But as I'm sure, I don't know what clip you're going to show, but the memories come back to him instantaneously, and he is overcome with emotion, and it's not an act. I mean, when we were there filming him in his very humble home in Florida, I was shook as he was, as the memories flooded back to him and he was overcome with emotion.
Yeah, and I can just tell you, in the clip that we're going to show, we're going to actually see the courtroom in Nuremberg that you described. Not yet, please, not yet. We're going to see the courtroom and have an opportunity. But I just wanted to ask you this, Barry. Did he like the film? I mean, he had an opportunity to talk to you about it. What was his reaction to it?
Well, I showed him the film. He was 99, on his way to 100, and I was. It's probably the fastest film I ever made. I really felt committed to showing the film to him, and I so wanted him to be alive for it that I rushed. And yet, we all have our standards of quality. I kept polishing, and then I flew down to Florida, and I rented a movie theater for just the two of us to see it. I wasn't going to send him a link, although he is technically proficient. He's got an iPhone. He's on a Mac daily. But I really wanted him to see the film and see it together. So I rented a movie theater for just the two of us. He thought it was an outrageous gesture. What a waste of money. We could be watching this in my place. I said, no. When are you going to see Ben Ferenz on an 80-foot screen? And
Right.
We sat together, we watched the movie, he cried, and I get emotional talking about it. But at the end of the film, he put his hand on my hand and he said, "This is all I need. Thank you so much." Gave me a hug. And then about 5 seconds later, he says, "Listen, in the second scene, I would use this shot, and you might want to tell that story." Though he became my co-producer. But we traveled the world with it. We were in Washington, we were at the United Nations, The Hague, twice, LA, all over the place with the film.
And all deserving. Okay, Jan, with your assistance, can we play the next clip, please? Thank you.
By the time we got there, to that stage, he had already picked lawyers for most of his trials. And he said, "Ben, look, you have the experience in the field of going into the camps, collecting evidence for the Army trials. We have a number of suspects, but if you have a suspect and no evidence, you have nothing. Your job is to go find the evidence." So I took a staff of about 50 people and went to Berlin, set up the organization to start searching in the archives of the Foreign Ministry, the SS, the Gestapo, the Army, and the industrialists to see what evidence we had that they had committed war crimes. It was in that capacity that one of my staff members, a boy from Switzerland, came and he said, "Look what I found in the offices of the Foreign Ministry." And it was a complete dossier, the daily reports coming in from the front saying how many Jews these units had murdered. Now, these units were called Einsatzgruppen, and it was deliberately disguised so that you couldn't tell from the name what it was, because their assignment was to go in behind the German lines and then murder. They never used the word murder. They said eliminate, exterminate every single Jewish man, woman, and child they could lay their hands on, and do the same thing for the Gypsies and do the same thing for any suspected possible enemies of the Reich. That was their job. They had these daily reports sent back to Berlin where they were consolidated and put together in a folder, and each of those reports was sent down, and I had the distribution list to 99 different branches of the German government. The people like the Army who said, "I never heard anything about that, I was not in my area," and so on. That was baloney. They were on my distribution list. So I took a little adding machine and began to add them up. And when I reached a million people murdered, I said, "That's enough." I took a sampling, took the next plane from Berlin, where I had the headquarters for that, went down to Nuremberg, and I said, "General," by that time he had been promoted, "we got to put on a new trial."
The Einsatzgruppen were task forces moving behind the front lines, and their only purpose was to kill Jews, minorities, and opposition. So they were really like killing squads.
These were the forces that rode around and machine gun whole villages and communities lined up on the edge of mass graves. This was not the industrial horror of Auschwitz. This was a direct human being to human being atrocity. It concentrated in a very direct way the ability of one human being to savagely destroy another in a way that is just incomprehensible.
He said, I'm sorry, we can't do it. All the 12 trials have been approved by the Pentagon. We have the staff has already been assigned. We don't have staff. We probably can't get approval for any more crimes anyway. The Pentagon had already cooled on the trials, so we can't do it. I said, you can't let these guys go. I have in my hand mass murder on an incredible scale. The evidence is all here. You're not going to let these guys walk away. He said, well, can you do it in addition to your other work? And I said, sure. He said, okay, so you do it. Okay, and so it happened, and I became the chief prosecutor of what turned out to be the biggest murder trial in human history.
I have to say, looking back on myself at 27, I don't know about you, can't think of very many people who would have had the confidence, the skill, and the knowledge in a new legal territory to be so persuasive in that role.
First of all, you only pick a guy who's in captivity. You don't name Adolf Hitler because you know he's dead, and there's no sense putting him in. So I first said, is he dead or alive? And how do we have him? If we haven't got him, Mengele and people like that, forget it. They may be the top two if we haven't got him. So you have to know he's in captivity. Now, then what evidence do we have against it? The Einsatzgruppe was easy. I had their daily reports. I had the roster of all the members of the Einsatzgruppe. So I just went through them and picked me out the highest ranking ones. And so I had about 5 or 6 generals. I had no enlisted men in my doc. Having been an enlisted man in the United States Army, maybe I was biased. No enlisted men in my doc. Give me the highest rank and the best educated. Those are the 2 criteria. Many of them with doctorate degrees. Dr. Roche had a double doctorate, and I never had heard that before. I was surprised. And Dr. 2 doctorates. He killed 33,721 Jews in 2 days, 29 and 30 September 1941. I got the bastard. I was the first one in the courtroom. I went in, I sat down. There was nobody but me. I was thinking over my statement, which I had written the day before. I was seeing if I could improve it. And I was waiting for the trial to begin. I was calm. I was determined. I didn't realize I would be making history.
We are now ready to hear the presentation by the prosecution.
I made the opening statement which stated the case. It did not appear on the film, because the film didn't start rolling until after the first paragraph had been done. And what it left out was the important beginning. It was, may it please your honors, it is with sorrow and with hope that we here disclose the massive murder of 1 million people, etc.
This was the tragic fulfillment of a program of intolerance and arrogance.
But I was very specific.
Vengeance is not our goal, nor do we seek merely a just retribution. We ask this court to affirm by international penal action man's right to live in peace and dignity, regardless of his race or creed. The case we present is a plea of humanity to law.
You know, just a very moving clip, Barry, but you know, it's referred to a 27-year-old prosecutor. What it isn't said in the film is that this was his first trial. His first trial is prosecuting the biggest murder case in the history of mankind, and he did it, you know, so ably. But I want to refer to something that he says in his submission that to me is so poignant and really worthy of just thinking about for a moment. I mean, here is a Jewish prosecutor standing in a courtroom, not decades later when we go to Auschwitz and we look at it, you know, as a museum, decades since the Holocaust occurred, still, of course, you know, very powerful. But this was months after the Holocaust ended. He's in the city where the propaganda rallies perpetrated, and he's sitting and standing a few feet away from some of the biggest architects of this heinous Holocaust and crime. And here's a man standing in a courtroom where they're looking at receiving justice and saying vengeance isn't our goal. I mean, to me, you know, it's so easy to say, well, that's something you would expect to be said, but for me, to me, that stands out as the most powerful part of the whole movie. That really, that isn't what guides this man, is it, Barry?
No, that's not what drives him at all. You know, his mantra has always been, we need to go through law, not war. And even when he was invited to the executions, he had no interest in attending and didn't, and was quite shocked that many of the sentences came back as death versus life in prison. And you have to keep in mind that, you know, at that point, by the time he ran his trial, that was very little taste in Germany amongst the politicians, amongst the Germans themselves for any more of this. They wanted to move on. So another trial, they didn't want it.
Okay, so we're going to move on now to another film, and much lighter mode. We're going to have some fun with this, Barry, and it's a film about Eddie Greenspan, Criminal Mind. And I always thought, you know, when people kind of say I'm a criminal lawyer, I make it clear, you know, that isn't what I do for a living. It's the people who, in some cases, I defend, or certainly alleged to be criminals. And so this wonderful movie you made about the late Eddie Greenspan. I met you in Eddie Greenspan's office. You remember that moment when I was there interviewing Eddie for the Conrad Black book that I was writing, and yes, you stepped into the office. And I also remember that whose name escapes me, the one who started the Toronto Film Festival. You know, I'm walking in, you're there, and he's sitting on the couch lounging there, and he was a great friend of Eddie Greenspan's as well. Dusty Cole, right? And you know, just a wonderful human being. I know we all miss him, but it's really important to remember just what a great criminal defense lawyer Eddie Greenspan was, and we're going to talk more about that in a moment. But one of his legacies is his fight against the death penalty, and you capture that in the film, and we're going to show the clip. But that was very important to him, wasn't fighting the death penalty, Barry?
Huge. Left his practice for a year to campaign against it. We were super close friends. I miss him every day. I think the most gutting loss I've ever had on that end of it. Very hard for me still. But the one thing that we fought constantly about was the death penalty. Eddie had a television show on for a little while called Real Justice, where he looked at movies. And I brought on a film that debated the death penalty called Star Chamber, which was a really stupid movie, but about judges that go and carry out their own death sentences. And I was a guest on the show with Eddie, and we fought like cats and dogs on the show. It was very funny. But yes, that was very, very, very important to him, as it is to the next generation. His daughter, Juliana, who runs the firm now, is also a firm believer in the abolition of the death penalty.
All right. So Jen, could you please play the next clip for us?
35 undecided. To address this issue, we are joined this morning by advocates from both sides. In Ottawa, Conservative MP Bill Daum, and joining us here, criminal lawyer Edward Greenspan. Gentlemen, good morning to you both.
In 1987, Greenspan closed his practice and began a 6-month tour across the country, a one-man crusade against the reinstatement of the death penalty.
It is morally wrong, and I think no one would disagree, that if you boil someone in oil, or if you burn them at the stake, or if you use crucifixion as the Romans did, that is morally unacceptable. Now, the common thread between all of the ways in which we have learned to kill people is that we kill them. All Mr. Daum wants to do is do it in a more nice fashion, by either sticking a needle in them. But it's still state revenge by execution.
The one thing that I was able to do in going around the country and debating the subject was to show people that it has no impact at all on the death rate, on the homicide rate.
It should be unconscionable for any Canadian Minister of Justice ever in the year 2000 or for the rest of humanity to ever send anybody back to a country to face the death penalty.
I get to see the bodies, I get to see the blood, I get to see the guts and gore. I get to really see the person before he's cleaned up and goes to court who is being accused of this horrific crime. That person I don't want to see on the street again. I don't want to give him any opportunity to commit such a crime again. And yes, I believe that an eye for an eye in this particular case, as a lot of these homicides are.
I believe in capital punishment only for those who shoot me. Then, of course, they should be executed with or without a trial. But for everybody else, we just aren't good enough.
For me, because the system is far from perfect, although I think the Canadian justice system is probably one of the very finest on this planet, ever on this planet, it makes mistakes. And the death penalty, in my view, should only be used when you are living in a system where there are no possibility of mistakes, and that can never happen.
I'll just mention, Barry, that was F. Lee Bailey, who we see being interviewed at the end, who is most famous, although he had many cases for defending O.J. Simpson. And he was a great fan of Eddie Greenspan. It was interesting that he actually followed and knew quite a great deal about him. But you know, one of the legacies of Eddie Greenspan's life, and there are many, is that the death penalty will never return to our country. And you know, he deserves a lot of credit. But one of the great strengths of Eddie Greenspan, and you write about this in your book, and I just want to show it for everyone because it's a wonderful book, Moguls, Monsters, and Madmen, an uncensored life and show business, Barry Avrich. This came out about 2 years ago, Barry, am I right about that?
Yeah.
And I encourage everyone, to read it. It's engaging and interesting. But you write about Eddie Greenspan there, and one of the things that you picked on that I always thought was one of his great strengths was his humor. And I'll just tell you a story. My wife and I went to a concert for a charity called ORT, and Jackie Mason was going to be the lead in the program. And I think that Eddie's family had some involvement in the philanthropy of that organization, as I recall. And Eddie introduced Jackie Mason. And so, so Eddie gets up and he's hysterical. He's hilarious. I watched the people were just, and Jackie Mason came out, and I'll never forget this moment. He was furious. And he says, "What is this? I'm the lead actor, and you bring out this guy who's funnier than me." To me, that was just Eddie Greenspan.
Well, Eddie killed that. It was at the Pantages, and Jackie Mason, who I went on to do a lot of work with, never forgot that. And anytime I was coming in to see him in New York, and I'd have lunch with Jackie for many years, and he would always go, "Is that lawyer still around? I can't believe that guy upstaged me. Unbelievable. I can't get over it. He thinks he's a comedian. He took over the whole crowd. But he never never forgot it. But Eddie
Never. He killed it. He killed it. And you know, he would do that in court. I mean, obviously you'd have to pick the right case. You know, there's some cases that, you know, you can never be funny. But he also, it wasn't just that he was funny and he picked the right moment, but he had this warmth. He had this lovable trait, but equally on a moment, he could become ferocious and passionate. He had that ability to have both sides, you know, which you need to have. That was part of it.
Didn't want to get into an argument. I mean, we met every Saturday for lunch, and then more frequently at the end of his life. I just sensed it, and we just would meet probably 3 times a week. And if you're on the opposing side, he could destroy you. And right. Yet he was also painfully shy and a very funny man. I mean, you know, you're right. I mean, there's famous lines of him in court where one of the great ones where he was getting up defending a murder, and he said and if you knew Eddie, he was a large man, and he said, you know, I wish I was as thin as the evidence that the right. court has in this case. There were many of those, but he was a brilliant speaker. Brilliant. His speeches, he labored over them every turn of a phrase. Brilliant writer.
All right. Well, that's a great segue to the next clip. Jan, can we play the next clip, please? Thank you.
You can get no better defense than the defense offered by Eddie Greenspan, and he's the person who he sets the bar, he sets the standard, and it's the standard of excellence that we all try to meet.
It's fundamental to the way we conceive criminal justice that each and every accused person will have a gladiator standing beside them against the extraordinary power that the state can bring to bear upon us as individuals. It's embedded in the Anglo-American Canadian justice system. It's not embedded in the inquisitorial system of Europe, but it's the foundation of our system. And Ed Greenspan has consistently made this point over and over and over through the years as effectively, as passionately as anybody in this country.
The defense is there to try and make sure the state can make the case properly. They're not there to adjudicate the truth or to make sure the truth happens. They're there to make sure the state doesn't abuse individual rights of the accused and has its evidence in order. That's all their job is. I think far too many of them are hired guns and have absolutely no soul.
I'm comfortable in being one of the few people in the country who actually believes that somebody's innocent until proven guilty. I mean, my own mother didn't believe in that. My own mother would call me and say, somebody got arrested. She'd say, Eddie, don't take that case. Please don't take that case. He clearly did it. And most of the people in Canada believe that if somebody's arrested by the police, they did it. I don't believe that. I don't believe that a police officer who went to high school just like me all of a sudden is a genius and is never wrong, can never be wrong. Somebody says they're innocent. For me, they're innocent.
You know, Barry, it's interesting. That was a Toronto Star journalist who disparaged the vast majority of criminal defense lawyers, describing them as soulless. And interesting because before lawyers like Eddie Greenspan came around, and it's not that long ago, that was the perception of the criminal defense bar, which was largely men, largely white men when I entered the profession, not that long ago. And it was people like them, like Eddie, who changed that perception. That when we walk into a courtroom now, we owe it to the Eddie Greenspans and the Brian Greenspan, who you saw at the outset of that interview, his brother, changing the perception of criminal defense lawyers actually serving not just a utilitarian purpose, but I think in many instances a noble purpose. And that again is, we talked about the death penalty, but that's another part of the important legacy of Eddie Greenspan. So, well, I know he would appreciate that. We'd have, if he was here, he'd say, okay, let's go have a pastrami sandwich now, right? He loved his chili.
We could have the most insane lunch or dinner, and he'd always ask the waiter, so you have ice cream? You got, what do you got? How many flavors you have? You got ice cream? And we just had 14 sandwiches and a steak. Yeah, so you got ice cream? Have some ice cream.
Well, we were both privileged to know him. We can both say that. And thank you for making that wonderful film, A Criminal Mind. So let's turn to the next film, and it's a recent film, and I must tell you that I thought this I watched it as a documentary, Barry, and I wasn't convinced that it was a documentary. I thought you were pulling my leg. I thought this was just, it's sort of the equivalent of an April Fool's joke, a movie, and it's the movie Made You Look, and it's about an art fraud. How much money was involved in the fraud in total, Barry?
80 million.
$80 million art fraud. So let's watch the trailer, and then we're going to talk about this film.
An $80 million scandal has the art world up in arms tonight.
A series of fakes that sold for tens of millions of dollars.
The gallery involved in the sale of over 30 fakes.
It takes more than a really talented con man to pull off a forgery of this magnitude.
Anne Friedman was the director of Knoedler Gallery.
She had such a prominent reputation. Knoedler is one of the oldest art galleries in the country.
Glafira Rosales brought approximately a dozen different works to Knoedler Gallery.
She comes in off the street with supposed masterpieces in the trunk of her car.
Motherwell, Jackson Pollock,
Rothko.
All of them from this same mysterious wealthy collector, Mr. X, who was from the Philippines.
This collector was a Swiss collector. He didn't want his name to be disclosed.
Oh yes, it had changed from the Philippines to Switzerland.
You couldn't make this stuff up. It was incredible.
An absolutely bizarre story for any dealer to accept.
It's a business.
These works went into the greatest museums in the world.
But there was a point where questions were coming up.
The analysts found that a yellow paint used in the Pollock hadn't been available until 1970. Jackson Pollock died in a car crash in 1956.
Either the paintings are all real or they're all fake.
We all know how that story turned out.
The paintings looked really, really good.
They fooled a lot of people.
The real is on the right. It's not easy.
The one on the right is real.
What surprised you about this case?
It surprised me that the paintings were being made in Queens by a math professor.
These fakes were painted by an unknown Chinese artist in the garage of his home.
I mean, it was just shocking.
Rosales' boyfriend, Juan Carlos Bergantinos, worked with the painter to create the forgeries.
He ran away, left her holding the bag, and he took almost all the money.
Who else should be in jail for this?
Yo sé que...
No. Oh. Okay, he doesn't like that question.
We're talking here about $80.7 million worth of fake paintings.
I was fooled. I believed the paintings were absolutely real.
She knew exactly what she was doing.
I didn't know that this would drastically affect these people's lives.
Who was involved?
What's the whole story?
How could you devise such a scheme?
That was, as it turned out, just the beginning of the story.
So Barry, let me take the question that woman just asked and add a little part to it, which is, how could you devise such a scheme and get away with it? That's really the ultimate question here. How in the world did this scheme work?
I had a ton of fun making this movie, and to the point now where it was made for the CBC in Canada and released globally on Netflix, and we're now crazy involved in getting this made as a scripted series because the characters are right out of Hollywood Central Casting. And again, a ton of lawyers. I must have gone, the lawyer for Anne Friedman made his war room available for me. So I must have, and I'm not a lawyer, but must have waded through, hundreds of thousands of documents on this. It's a complex case, but how did it happen? It happened over 10 years, 60 paintings. And to me, the biggest question of all is, if you're the Bonnie and Clyde, that couple that walked into the most prestigious art gallery at the time with a fake, and you managed to sell one and walked away with a couple of $100,000 in your pocket, wouldn't you just get out of town? No.
Yeah.
They did it for 10 years, 60 paintings, $80 million. It's insane. And why it worked is very simple. Lots of blame to go around. Greed, trophy hunting, the collectors, the art collectors themselves who had to have it. These paintings rarely come up. Rothkos and Pollocks don't come up for sale. There's a Rothko, there's a Pollock available. I'm in. They were getting them at decent prices. The art consultants, which to me are some of the biggest questions
Careful, Barry.
in the story, because they're teaching art collectors how to buy with their ears and their eyes. Steve, you should have this painting. It's important for your collection. This will get you invited to the next show. So everybody involved, this was a good thing for everybody. And so everybody went along with it.
Yeah, but I mean, wouldn't you think, I don't know, just looking at it from a distance, before I'm going to spend $5 million to buy a painting, I'm going to bring an art expert in to maybe verify the authenticity of the painting. I mean, just seems to be like the kind of thing I might do if I was spending $5 million, but that didn't happen here, right?
I don't know if you would have brought in an art expert. You would have brought in a consultant. Anne Friedman, who ran the Knoedler Gallery, brought in experts who they later on said, well, I never said it was real, but they were saying, oh yeah. And, and even the foundations that represent Robert Motherwell and Pollock were saying, yes, it's real, because a discovery of a great work is good. It keeps the machine going in the art world, this unregulated, shadowy, opaque world where people make up prices. There's no value to the physical painting of canvas and paint. I can walk my computer around the corner and show you a Motherwell I bought in China that looks, dead on that end of it. And it's just, paint on canvas. So how they're coming up with prices is just astonishing.
How did the story unravel? How was the fraud ultimately exposed?
Well, I mean, what happened ultimately was that Pierre Lagrange, who was a hedge fund guy out of London, England, was getting divorced and decided to get one of his paintings appraised and sent it to either to Sotheby's or Christie's, and they came back and had questions about the painting. And so he brought in a forensic expert who spent a lot of money looking at pigmentation and said, this painting is fake. So that started the house of cards, although there had been over the 10 years other suspicious moments of the art, all coming from the same couple that had been questioned. But ultimately it was Pierre Lagrange, a New York Times story that broke it. And then the FBI that decided to look into it. And then Glafira Rosales, the Mexican part of the Bonnie and Clyde team with her husband, Carlos Bergantinos Diaz, she ends up getting arrested and her husband takes off to Spain. The forger, Pei-Shen Quinn, takes off to China. And so the only one left holding the bag is Glafira, who sits in jail for about 6 months before she finally says, okay, I did it, it's fake. And really what what forced her to give it up was the fact that the FBI, the Southern District in New York, who are vicious, couldn't care less about fake paintings or rich people getting cheated. Who cares? What they cared about was wire fraud and money laundering. And Glafira had been taking all this money and wiring it to the boyfriend in Spain. And that's what brought the whole thing down. And it was only on that day where Anne Friedman, again, this woman with a 4-decade career in art, basically finally admitted the fact, what? She never believed they were fake. And that was the worst day in her life. The question in the film that's debated now worldwide, I get 50 or 60 emails a week from people weighing in on this, is did Anne Friedman, who was running the Knoedler Gallery, know or not know?
Okay, well, you'll have a chance, all the viewers have a chance to make that determination on their own. The movie has made you look, and they can get it on Netflix, right, Barry?
I'll get it. In Canada, they can get it on CBC Gem. If they're calling from the United States or they figured out a way around it, they can get it on Netflix.
All right. So let's talk about one final film before we end our program today. And we don't have a clip from it. It's Churchill and the Jews. And I'm just curious how, it's so different than all of the other documentaries made. How were you drawn to do this film about Winston Churchill and the Jewish people?
Well, I knew of Churchill. I did not know of Winston Churchill's connection to Jewish people. I did not know of Sir Martin Gilbert, a Jew who was a Churchillian, and Churchill's authorized biographer. I did not know of him. Michael Levine, who's a former lawyer and agent, literary agent, probably one of the best and most known, renowned in the country, brought the project to me. He was representing Sir Martin Gilbert, who had a connection to Canada. And I said to them, to both Sir Martin Gilbert and to Michael Levine, I'm not the guy. I'm the person that thinks that Winston Churchill's an exit on the 401. I'm not the guy to make this film. And they said, and Michael said, go to London and meet with Sir Martin. So I did. I met him, and over on a Shabbat afternoon, he was somewhat observant, and over a little bit of honey cake, he said, let me tell you why you're the guy to make the film, because you're the Hollywood guy who will make this film accessible and not boring. You'll tell the story in an entertaining way. And I had a lot of fun making it, traveled all over the world doing it, telling the story about this unfathomable story of how Sir Winston Churchill, through the guidance and wisdom of his father, who always said Manchester, England, where they lived and where he convinced Winston to run for office, said, keep Jewish people close to you. Their values in life and their brains are way more advanced than anybody else. And of course, Winston Churchill had a relationship with the Rothschilds and others, and decided along the way, thankfully due to his father and his relationship with Jewish families in England, to always look out for them. Now, there's lots of history and situations where he did not, but if you're going to judge Churchill in his overall focus on making sure that Israel became a state and fought for the Jews in England, an anti-Semitic country, his record is better than Chamberlain or most others.
All right, and I was just going to ask you about that. He's stood out in terms of his support for the state of Israel. Interestingly, Chaim Weizmann had a connection to Manchester. He actually was a professor at the University of Manchester, and that's where he met Lord Balfour. And the Balfour Declaration comes out of the relationship between Weizmann and Balfour out of Manchester. So Manchester.
A funny story on that, Steve. When we were doing the film, producing the film, Gordon Pinsent, the great Gordon Pinsent, was narrating the film, and we were in the studio, and we got to that moment where Chaim Weizmann had this great, profound effect on Churchill, and Gordon Pinsent is narrating it. It says, and there came a time, in Churchill's life where shame Weizmann, and I, what? And so we had to go through a few takes, and I'd have to go into the booth with Gordon Pinsent to say Chaim, and he'd go, shame, no, Chaim, and we did that about 14 times, and he finally got it.
What a wonderful story to end our program on. We need to have some fun, Barry, and we've looked at some interesting films and projects, and I know you have so many more stories to tell. It occurred to me you're going to have to write another book, because I know so many films you made, the David Foster film, Howie Mandel film. This doesn't capture it. You're going to have to do volume 2.
Not happening. I'll come back. We'll do a part 2 on your show. I'm not doing another book.
Part 2 of my show. Okay. Anyways, first of all, I know I speak on behalf of everyone. One of the things about Zoom, Barry, is that when you say you speak on behalf of everyone, you just have to take me at my word. But we got a lovely message from someone named Matthew in the chat room who said, what a wonderful program. I'm paraphrasing, and thank you so much. And giving of your time at a time it's so difficult for so many people during COVID is really a mitzvah. And I just wanted to thank you so much for giving of your time. And I'm going to take you up on that. We'll bring you back for another program.
Pleasure.
Yeah, just before we go, and I'll give you a chance if you want, Barry, to say anything in a moment. I just have to mention our sponsors, Beth Sholem Synagogue, UJ Federation of Greater Toronto, our partners, Beth David Synagogue, Beth Emet Beis Yehuda Synagogue, Beth Radon Congregation, Beth Torah Congregation, Congregation Habonim, and Stand With Us Canada. We're so grateful for your support. And as I always point out, it's hugely important that we attract a cross-section of our community, and we continue to get great numbers at this program. And a personal note, I'll mention My book, Pharaoh and the Clever Assassin, historical fiction. Here's the cover right there, my name on it. Legal thriller, set in 1901 at the Buffalo World's Fair. You can now pre-order it, Chapters Indigo. My book launch will be on May the 5th. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Barry. You get the last word because you deserve it. What would you like to say?
Thank you, Steve. Anywhere you ask me to go, I go. I thank you for your friendship, and I thank you for everybody tuning in. In Canada, I don't think we're that great about celebrating each other. And so I'm happy that, you have a forum like this to tell stories, and that as Jewish people, that's what we do. So I appreciate the opportunity tonight.
I just want to tell you that I'm angry at you for one thing. I'm not going to be able to go to bed tonight without thinking about that Gordon Pinson story about Chaim Weitzman. So I'm not happy with you, Barry Avrich. I want you to know that. Anyways, I love you. Okay, good night, everyone. Thank you, and look forward to seeing April 20th. It's the Oscars. Have a good night. Take care.